Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise and Fly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Locals, Twitter, Telegram, Facebook, all of which are in the description box as well. And in addition to supporting me on Locals, you can also support me on Buy Me a Coffee. I will, of course, read super chats first, and then any other chats as time permits. And this is sort of a riff off last Tuesday's show, where I did the video on a more broader description of the church and on war, and a video that I was asked to do quite a while ago and finally got around to. One of the things that I mentioned was, obviously, there's way too many quotes to go through, and I had to make a lot of different points, so I only narrowly quoted a few relevant passages that I thought proved the point quite nicely. But one of the things that I've had all throughout life, both IRL and online, is this persistent, annoying, obnoxious argument over what did the Christians originally say. In this particular case, about the separation from the world, war, and the state. And there's basically, as anybody who saw last week's show will know, that there's basically this idiotic nonsense idea that the early church was divided and unclear as to what they actually said on the matter. Well, I did give some notes for people to read in the last video's description, comment on last video. Now it's in the description box for this video, which, a lot of people are busy. They may not get around to reading it, but people usually get around to watching my videos. So one of the things I want to do with tonight and probably other Tuesdays, is a lot to go through, guys, so buckle up, is go through what the early Christians prior to Eusebius wrote about these three issues of war, the state, and separation from the world. And let's just see if all of these people who say, oh, well, of course, they didn't say that. There was all sorts of ambiguities and blah, blah, blah. Because ultimately the historical record is crystal clear. And I obviously, it would be too much to hope that once and for all we could settle this. But I'm going to do my part to settle it. We've got Zero World, Neurocraft, and Bing Bong, hello. So basically, I'll be reading these quotes and then giving commentaries as I see as relevant. And we'll get through basically a fairly exhaustive account of the early Christians in their own words. And again, you can follow along with the link that I put in the description box of what they taught. And then you can also then use the citation mechanism that's included with the comments to follow them on, or to look them up and read them in the Ancient Nicene Church Fathers set. You can find that online at ccel.com or org, I think. And you can also find it at New Advent, the Catholic Encyclopedia. They also have it. So ccl.org, and then New Advent will have all of these quotes as well. So this is the early church of non-resistance. Aristides, they comfort their oppressors and make them their friends. They do good to their enemies. Justin the Martyr, we will not ask you to punish our accusers. Their present wickedness is sufficient punishment. Athenagoras, we have learned not to return blow for blow, nor to go to law with those who plunder and rob us. Not only that, but to those who strike us on the right side of the side of the face, we learn to offer the other side also. Irenaeus, he commanded his followers not only to not strike others, but even when they themselves are struck, to present the other cheek. He commanded them not only to not injure their neighbors, nor to do them any evil, but also when they are dealt with wickedly to be long-suffering. Clement of Alexandria, philosophers will then with propriety be taken up in a friendly exposure, but not in the manner of avenging themselves on our detractors. Rather will be for the purpose of their conversion, for vengeance is far from being the case with which persons who have learned to bless those who curse. Again, Clement, the spiritual man never cherishes resentment or harbors a grudge against anyone, even though deserving of hatred for his conduct. Again, Clement, Christians are not allowed to use violence to correct the delinquencies of sins. Tertullian, Hippias, a pagan, is put to death for lying plots against the state. No Christian ever attempted such a thing on behalf of his brethren, even when persecution was scattering them abroad with every atrocity. Now, this is something that's interesting. We'll see this again, I think, in the quotes that I have arranged here in the 4th century Father Arnobius. The idea, imagine a time when Christians could say that they never attempted a plot against those in power. I mean, at this far down in the history of Christianity, most people would laugh at that, saying that's ridiculous. How could that ever be the case? But at one point, it was the case. It was the case that a Christian could say that. We've never plotted against a political leader, which, again, shows you the different tone and tenor of the church at this time. We'll be reading quite a few Tertullian quotes, so I won't even bother saying Tertullian. It's self-evident at this point. If dragged to trial, he does not resist. The practice of the old law was to avenge itself by the vengeance of the sword. It was to pluck out eye for eye and to inflict retaliatory revenge for injury. However, the practice of the new law points to clemency. Men of old were used to requiring eye for eye and tooth for tooth and to repay evil, with usury. But after Christ has supervened and has united the grace of faith with patience, now it is no longer lawful to attack others, even with words, nor to merely say fool without danger of the judgment. Christ says, love your enemies and bless your cursers and pray for your persecutors. If someone attempts to provoke you by physical violence, the admonition of the Lord is at hand. He says, to him who strikes you on the face, turn the other cheek also. Let outrageousness be worn out by your patience. Whatever that blow may be, join with pain and scorn, it will receive a heavier one from the Lord. For what difference is there between provoker and provoked? The only difference is that the former was the first to do the evil, but the latter did evil afterwards. Each one stands condemned in the eyes of the Lord for hurting a man, for God both prohibits and condemns every wickedness. In doing evil, there is no account taken of the order. The commandment is absolute. Evil is not to be repaid with evil. Christ plainly teaches a new kind of long-suffering when he actually prohibits the reprisals that the Creator permitted in requiring an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The Lord will save them in that day, even his people like sheep. No one gives the name of sheep to those who fall in battle with arms in hand, or those who were killed in repelling force with force. Rather, it is given only to those who are slain, yielding themselves up on their place of duty and with patience, rather than fighting in self-defense. Origin. Moreover, the command about the right cheek being struck is most literally impossible, since everyone who strikes, unless he happens to have some bodily irregularity, strikes the left cheek with the right hand. Celsus, a pagan critic, says they also have a teaching to this effect, that we should not avenge ourselves on one who injures us. Or as Christ expresses it, whoever will strike you on the cheek, turn the other to him also. We revile no one, for we believe that the revilers will not inherit the kingdom of God. And we read, bless them that curse you, bless and curse not, also being reviled, we also bless. Commodianus, do not willingly use force and do not return force when it is used against you. This is Cyprian. We may not hate, and we please God more by rendering no return for wrong. Therefore, we exhort you to make satisfaction to God. Do this while you have the power, while there yet remain in you something of life. We do not envy your comforts, nor do we conceal the divine benefits. We repay kindness for your kind in return for the torment and penalties that are inflicted on us. We point out to you the ways of salvation. Some more Cyprian. The Christian has departed from rage and carnal contentions as if from the hurricanes of the sea. He has already begun to be tranquil and meek in the harbor of Christ. Therefore, he should allow neither anger nor discord within his breath, for he must neither return evil for evil nor bear hatred. Even our enemies are to be loved. Theonas of Alexandria, do no one any injury at any time, provoke no one to anger. If an injury is done to you, look to Jesus Christ, and even as you desire him to forgive your transgressions, also forgive others theirs. Lactantius, religion is to be defended not by putting to death, but by dying, not by cruelty, but by patient endurance, not by guilt, but by good faith. For the former belongs to evil, but the latter to the good. For if you wish to defend religion by bloodshed, tortures, and guilt, it will no longer be defended. Rather, it will be polluted and profaned, and therefore we suffer such impious things. We do not resist even in word. Rather, we leave vengeance to God. We do not act as these persons who have it appear that they are defenders of their gods, who rage with restraint against those who do not worship them. Oh, wow. How many, in light again, 21st century, how many would think this was normative for Christians? For if you wish to defend religion by bloodshed, tortures, and guilt, it will no longer be defended. I mean, I think a case in point is the bad reputation the Catholic Church has got. I mean, its reputation precedes it for doing all of these things. And I think part of the truth that Lactantius is getting at is if you defend your faith this way, you're going to have a lot of people that remember that. So, for example, the Amish don't have this track record to worry about. Other people may not like them for other reasons. And, of course, Christians are told they won't be liked at all by the world according to Christ. But the point is, though, they're not disliked for those reasons. If If we all derive our origin from one man whom God created, we are clearly of one blood. Therefore, it must be considered the greatest wickedness to hate a man, even if he is guilty. On this account, God has forbidden us to ever contract enmities. Rather, they are to be eliminated so that we soothe those who are our enemies by reminding them of their relationship. For if we are all inspired and quickened by one God, what else are we except brothers? Therefore, they are to be considered as savage beasts who injure man, who in opposition to every law and right of human nature plunder, torture, slay, and banish. On account of this relationship of brotherhood, God teaches us never to do evil, but always good. When we suffer such ungodly things, we do not resist even in word, rather we leave vengeance to God. The Christian does injury to no one. He does not desire the property of others. Yeah, in light of today, that one's not going to go. That's going to sound almost impossible to people. Does not desire the property of others. In fact, he does not even defend his own property if it is taken from him by violence, for he knows how to patiently bear an injury inflicted upon him. If anyone should be so shameless as to inflict injury on a good and just man, such a man must bear it with calmness and moderation. He will not take upon himself his revenge. Rather, he will reserve it for the judgment of God. He must maintain innocence at all times and in all places. And this commandment is not limited merely to his not being the first to inflict injury on another. Rather, he should not even avenge it when injury is inflicted on him. For there sits on the judgment seat a very great and impartial judge. Disputations of Archelaus and Manes, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that is the expression of justice. However, his injunction that man who is struck on one cheek should offer the other also, that is the expression of goodness. Now are justice and goodness opposed to each other? Far from it. Rather, there has been one advancement from simple justice to positive goodness. When a Christian is arrested, he does not resist, nor does he avenge himself. Your unrighteous violence, even though our people are numerous, Cyprian. Lactantius, we do not resist those who injure us, for we yield to them. So this first selection of quotes is about the Christian's disposition towards the enemy. So this goes Matthew 5, turn the other cheek. So this is more of where you're starting with the heart. So this sort of heart perspective, how you view the broader struggle against evil. Now we're going to get to something a little more specific, serving in the armed forces of an empire. Some of these quotes will be familiar because I read them last time, but they also bear repeating. Justin the Martyr. And when the spirit of prophecy speaks as predicting things that are come to pass, he speaks in this way: for out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And that it did so come to pass, we can convince you. For from Jerusalem there went out into the world 12 men, 12 in number, and these illiterate of no ability in speaking. But by the power of God they proclaimed to every race of men that they were sent by Christ to teach to all the word of God. And we who formerly used to murder one another do not only now refrain from making war upon our enemies, but also that we may not lie nor deceive our examiners, willfully die confessing Christ. Again, Justin. And we who are filled with war and mutual slaughter and every kind of wickedness have each through the whole earth changed our warlike weapons, swords into plowshares, and our spears into implements of tillage. And we cultivate piety, righteousness, philanthropy, faith, and hope, which we have from the Father himself through him who was crucified. Tatian, I do not wish to be a king. I am not anxious to be rich. I decline military command. Athenagoras, we have learned not to return blow for blow, not to go to law with those who plunder and rob us. Instead, even to those who strike us on one side of the face, we offer the other side also. The new covenant that brings, Irenaeus, the new covenant that brings back peace and the law that gives life has gone forth over the whole earth, as the prophets said, for out of Zion will go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he will rebuke many people, and they will break down their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks, and they will no longer learn to fight. These people, Christians, form their swords and war lances into plowshares, that is, into instruments for peaceful purposes. So now they are unaccustomed to fighting. When they are struck, they also offer the other cheek. Clement of Alexandria, and there's quite a few from Clement. It is not war, but peace that we are trained. The Scythians, the Celts, the Iberians, and the Thracians are all warlike races. They are also greatly addicted to intoxication and think that drunkenness is an honorable, happy pursuit to engage in. But we, the people of peace, feast for lawful enjoyment, not to wantonness. We drink sober cups of friendship. The one instrument of peace is what we employ, the word alone, by whom we honor God. We no longer use the ancient psaltery, trumpet, timbrel, flute. For those who are expert in war and scorners of the fear of God were accustomed to make use of them. Let our seals be either a dove or a fish, or a ship scudded before the wind. If there is anyone fishing, he will remember the apostle and the children drawn out of the water. We are not to draw an outline of a sword or a bow, since we follow peace. Nor should we draw an outline of ... drinking cups, since we are temperate. Let's see. Stowe Clement. He bids us to love our enemies, bless those that curse us, and pray for those who despitefully use us. And he says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone takes away your coat, do not hinder him from taking your cloak also. An enemy must be aided so that he may not continue as an enemy, for by help good feeling is compacted and enmity dissolved. We do not train women like Amazons to manliness in war, for we wish even the men to be peaceable. If then we are commanded, Tertullian, if then we are commanded to love our enemies, as I remarked above, whom have we to hate? If injured, we are forbidden to retaliate, lest we become just as bad ourselves. Who can suffer injury at our hands? How often you inflict gross cruelties on Christians. You do this partly because it is your own inclination, and partly in obedience to the laws. Yet, band together as we are, ever so ready to sacrifice our lives, what single case of revenge for injury are you able to point to? However, if it were held to be right for us to repay evil by evil, a single night with a torch or two could achieve an ample vengeance. But away with the idea of a divine sect avenging itself by human fires. Again, contrast that with later history of Christianity, and it's extremely stark. Extremely stark. We willingly yield to the sword, so what wars would we would not be both fit and eager to participate in against even unequal forces, if in our religion it were not counted better to be slain than to slay. The Christian does no harm even to his enemy. God puts his prohibition on every sort of man killing, but that one includes commandments: you shall not kill. Nation will not take up sword against nation, and they will by no means learn to fight. Who else, therefore, does this prophecy apply to other than us? For we are fully taught by a new law, and therefore observe these practices. The teaching of the new law points to clemency. It changes the primitive ferocity of the primitive execution of war upon the rivals and enemies of the law into peaceful actions of plowing and cultivating the land. No inquiry is made about the point of whether a believer may enter into military service. The question is also asked whether those in military may be admitted into the faith, even the rank and file of any inferior grade, who are not required to take part in sacrifices or capital punishments. A man cannot give his allegiance to two masters, God and Caesar. How will a Christian man participate in war? In fact, how will he serve even in peace without a sword? For the Lord has taken the sword away. It is also true that the soldiers came to John the Baptist and received the instructions from their conduct. It is true also that a centurion believed. Nevertheless, the Lord afterward, in disarming Peter, disarmed every soldier. And they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. In other words, they will change the dispositions of injurious minds, hostile tongues, blasphemy, and all kinds of evil into pursuits of moderation and peace. Nation will not lift up sword against nations. That is why they will not stir up conflict. Neither will they learn war anymore. That is the provocation of hostilities. So you should learn from this that Christ was not promised to pursue peace. Now you must deny either that these things are foretold, although they are plainly seen, or that they have been fulfilled, although you read them. I think we must first inquire whether warfare is proper at all for Christians. What point is there in discussing the merely incidental, when that on which it rests is to be condemned? Do we believe it is lawful for a human oath to be added to that one that is divine? Is it lawful for a man to come to pledge to another master after Christ became his master? Is it lawful to renounce father, mother, and all the nearest kinsfolk, whom even the law has condemned us to honor and love next to God himself? Is it lawful to make an occupation of the sword when the Lord proclaims that he who uses the sword will perish by the sword? Will the Son of Peace take part in the battle when it does not become him even to sue at law? Will he who is not the avenger even of his own wrongs apply the chain, the prison, and the torture and the punishment? Is the military laurel of triumph made of leaves or of corpses? Is it adorned with ribbons or with tombs? Is it wet with ointments or with tears of wives and mothers? It may be made of some dead Christians too, for Christ is also believed among the barbarians. Last from Tertullian here. Our religion commands us to love even our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us. Origen. And there's quite a few of Origen, so I won't bother repeating his name. The existence of many kingdoms would have been a hindrance to the spread of the doctrine of Jesus throughout the entire world. This was because of the need for men everywhere to engage in war and fight on behalf of their native country, which was the case before the times of Augustus. How, then, was it possible for the gospel doctrine of peace to prevail throughout the world? For it does not permit men to take vengeance upon their enemies. It was only possible because at the coming of Christ, a milder spirit had been everywhere introduced into the conduct of things. The statement of Celsus, a pagan critic, is false, that in the days of Jesus, others who were Jews rebelled against the Jewish state and became his followers. For neither Celsus nor those who think like him are able to point out any act on the part of Christians that hints of rebellion. There we go again. The Christians used to be able to say that we never rebelled against the civil magistrate. Again, except for certain sects like the Amish, it's almost inconceivable to say today. Let's see. In fact, if a revolt had led to the formation of the Christian Commonwealth, the Christian lawgiver would not have altogether forbidden the putting of men to death. So it could not have been derived, its existence in such a way, from the Jews, for they were permitted to take up arms in defense of the members of their family and to slay their enemies. Yet Christ nowhere teaches us that it is right for his own disciples to offer violence to anyone, no matter how wicked. For he who did not consider it to be in accord with his laws to allow the killing of any individual, whomever, for his laws were derived from a divine source. Indeed, if the Christians truly owe their origin to rebellion, they would not have adopted laws of so exceedingly mild a character. For their laws do not allow them on occasion to resist their persecutors, even when it was their fate to be slain as sheep. Christians were taught not to avenge themselves upon their enemies. They would not have made war, although capable, even if they had received authority to do so. For they have obtained this reward from God, that he has always warred on their behalf. On certain occasions, he has restrained those who rose up against them and desired to destroy them. On special occasions, some of them endured death for the sake of Christianity, and those individuals can be easily numbered. However, God has not permitted the whole nation of Christians to be exterminated. Perhaps the so-called wars among the bees convey instructions as to the manner in which wars should be waged in a just and orderly way among men, if ever there arise a necessity for them. To those who inquire of us from where we come, or who is our founder, we reply that we have come agreeably to the counsels of Jesus. We have cut down our hostile, insolent, and wearisome swords into plowshares. We have converted into pruning hooks the spears that were formerly used in war, for we no longer take up sword against nation, nor do we learn war anymore. That is because we have become children of peace for the sake of Jesus, who is our Lord, who is our leader. Celsus, a pagan critic, adds, how could God command the Israelites through Moses to gather wealth, to extend their dominion, to fill the earth, to put their enemies of every age to the sword, and to destroy them utterly? For on the one hand, his son, the man of Nazareth, promulgated laws quite opposite to these. He declared that no one can come to the Father who loves power, riches, or glory. Jesus said that to anyone who has given them one blow, they should offer to receive another. So, is it Moses or Jesus who taught falsely? When the Father sent Jesus, did he forget the commands that he had given to Moses? Or did he change his mind, condemn his own laws, and send forth a messenger with opposite instructions? Origen replied, well, see, this is interesting, right? Because in the dialogue with Celsus, this is where we have Origen arguing with an educated pagan. So as an educated pagan, he's assuming that all Christians are like this. And that Origen is then having to answer this question. Again, an educated pagan today wouldn't make that kind of a mistake. He wouldn't assume that about Christians. We would observe that it must be impossible for the legislation of Moses, taken literally, to harmonize with the calling of the Gentiles with their subjection to the Roman government. On the other hand, it would be impossible for the Jews to preserve their civil economy unchanged if they were to embrace the gospel. For Christians could not slay their enemies, nor could they condemn those who had broken the law to be burned or stoned, as Moses commands. In the case of the ancient Jews who had land and a form of government of their own, to take from them the right of making war upon their enemies, of fighting for their country, of putting to death or otherwise punishing adulterers, murderers, or others who were guilty of similar crimes, would have been to subject them to sudden and utter destruction whenever the enemy fell upon them. For in that case, their very laws would restrain them and prevent them from resisting the enemy. Yet that same providence, that of old gave the law and has now given the gospel of Jesus Christ, has destroyed their city and their temple, not wishing the Jewish state to continue any longer. However, this providence has extended the Christian religion day by day, so that it now is preached everywhere with boldness. And this in spite of the numerous obstacles that oppose the spread of Christ's teachings in the world. However, since it was the purpose of God that the nation should receive the benefits of Christ's teaching, all the devices of men against Christians have been brought to nothing, For the more that kings, rulers, and peoples have persecuted them everywhere, the more Christians have increased in number and grown in strength. Celsus, you surely do not say that if in compliance with your wish the Romans were to neglect their customary duties to gods and men and were to worship the Most High, that he would come down and fight for them so that they would not need any other help than this. For this same God promised of old and much more to those who served him. Yet see in what way he has helped the Jews and you. Instead of being masters of the whole world, the Jews are left with not so much a patch of ground or a home. Origen's reply, what would happen if instead of relatively few persons believing at present, the entire empire of Rome believed? They would pray to the word who of old said to the Hebrews when they were pursued by the Egyptians, the Lord will fight for you and you will hold your peace. And if all the Romans united in power with one accord, they would be able to put to flight far more enemies than those who were defended by the prayer of Moses. However, he had made the fulfillment of his promises depend on certain conditions, namely that they would observe and live according to his law. But if the Romans embraced the Christian faith according to the suspicion of Celsus, they would overcome their enemies when they prayed, or rather they would not war at all, for they promised to save 5 cities for the sake of 50 righteous persons. Men of God are assuredly the salt of the earth. They preserve the order of the world, and society is held together as long as the salt is uncorrupted. When God gives to the tempter permission to persecute us and we suffer persecution, and when God wishes us to be free from suffering, even in the middle of a world that hates us, we enjoy wonderful peace, trusting in the protection of him who said, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. In the next place, Celsus urges us to help the king with all our might, and to labor with him in the maintenance of justice, to fight for him, and if he requires it, to fight under him, or lead an army along with him. To this our answer is that we do, when occasion requires, give help to the kings, and that, so to say, a divine help, putting on the whole armor of God, and thus we do in obedience to the injunction of the apostle. I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority. And the more anyone excels in piety, the more effective help does he render to kings, even more than is given by soldiers who go forth to fight and slay as many of the enemy as they can. And to those enemies of our faith who require us to bear arms for the commonwealth and to slay men, we can reply, do not those who are priests at certain shrines and those who attend on certain gods as you account them keep their hands free from blood, that they may, with hands unstained and free from human blood, offer the appointed sacrifices to your gods, and even when the war is upon you, you never enlist a priest in the army. If that, then, is a laudable custom, how much more so that while others are engaged in battle, these two should engage as the priests and ministers of God, keeping their hands pure and wrestling in prayers to God on behalf of those who are fighting in a righteous cause, and for the kings who reign righteously, that whatever is opposed to those who act righteously may be destroyed. And as we by our prayers vanquish all demons who stir up war and lead to the violation of oaths and disturb the peace, we in this way are much more helpful to the kings and those who go into the field to fight for them. And we do take our part in public affairs when, along with righteous prayers, we join self-denying exercises and mediations, which teach us to despise pleasures and not to be led away by them. And none fight better for the king than we do. We do not indeed fight under him, although he requires it, but we fight on his behalf, forming a special army, an army of piety, offering up our prayers to God. And if Celsus would have us to lead armies in defense of our country, let him know that we do this too, and that not for the purpose of having been seen by men or of vainglory, for in secret and in our own hearts, these are prayers which ascend as from priests in behalf of our fellow citizens. And Christians are benefactors of their country more than others, for they train up citizens and inculcate piety to the Supreme Being, and they promote those whose lives in the smallest cities have been good and worthy to a divine and heavenly city, to whom it may be said, thou hast been faithful in the smallest city, come into a great one, where God standeth in the assembly of the gods and judgeth the gods in the midst. And he reckons among them, if thou no more die as a man or fall as one of the princes. Okay. Cyprian. Wars are scattered all over the earth with the bloody horde of camps. The whole world is wet with mutual blood. And murder, which is admitted to be a crime in the case of an individual, is called a virtue when it is committed wholesale. Impunity is claimed for the wicked deeds, not because they are guiltless, but because the cruelty is perpetuated on a grand scale. Christians do not attack their assailants in return, for it is not lawful for the innocent to kill even the guilty. The hand must not be spotted with sword and blood, not after the Eucharist is carried in it. Lactantius. When the worship of God was taken away, men lost the knowledge of good and evil. They began to fight with one another to plot and to achieve glory for themselves from the shedding of human blood. If only God were worshipped, there would not be dissensions and wars, for men would know they are the sons of one God. Why would the just man carry on war and mix himself with the passions of others when his mind is engaged in perpetual peace with men? Would he be delighted with foreign merchandise or with human blood? He who does not know how to seek gain. For the Christian is satisfied with his standard of living. He considered it unlawful not only to commit slaughter himself, but also to be present with those who do it. If desire is restrained, no one will use violence by land or sea. No one will lead an army to carry off and lay waste the property of others. For what are the interests of our country but the detriments of another state or nation? To extend the boundaries that are violently taken from others, to increase their power of the state, to improve the revenues, all of these things are not virtues, rather they are overthrown by virtues. How can a man be just who hates, who despoils, who puts to death? Yet those who strive to be serviceable to the country do all these things. When they speak of the duties, referring to warfare, their speech pertains neither to justice nor to true virtue. Let's see here. Therefore, it is not befitting that those who strive to keep the path of justice should be companions and sharers in this public homicide. For when God forbids us to kill, he prohibits more than open violence. That is not even allowed by the public laws. He also warns us against those doing those things that are considered lawful among men. For that reason, it will not be lawful for a just man to engage in warfare, since his warfare is justice itself. Nor is it lawful for him to accuse anyone of a capital charge, for it makes no difference whether you put a man to death by word or by the sword instead. That is because the act of putting to death itself is prohibited. Therefore, with regard to this command of God, there should be no exception at all. Rather, it is always unlawful to put a man to death whom God willed to be a sacred creature. And it is not right that a worshiper of God should be injured by another worshiper of God. Arnobius, you allege that those wars of which you speak were sparked because of hatred of our religion. However, it would not be difficult to prove that after the name of Christ was heard on the world, wars were not increased. In fact, they actually diminished in great measure by the restraining of furious passions. A numerous band of men, as we are, we have learned from his teaching and his laws that evil should not be repaid with evil. Rather, it is better to suffer wrong than to inflict it. We would rather shed our own blood than stain our hands and our conscience with that of another. As a result, an ungrateful world is now enjoying, and for a long period has enjoyed, a benefit from Christ. For by his means the rage of a savage ferocity has been softened, and has begun to withhold hostile hands from the blood of a fellow creature. In fact, if all men without exception would lend an ear for a while to his salutary and peaceful rules, the whole world would be living in the most peaceful tranquility. The world would have turned the use of steel into more peaceful uses, and would unite together in blessed harmony, maintaining inviolate the sanctity of treaties. Disputation of Archelaus and Manes. The soldiers were filled with wonder and admiration at the grandeur of the man's piety and generosity, and were struck with amazement. They felt the force of this example of pity. As a result, very many of them were added to the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ and threw off the belt of military service. Hippolytus, Apostolic Tradition 16. A soldier of the civil authority must be taught not to kill and to refuse to take an oath. If he is unwilling to comply, he must be rejected for baptism. A military commander or civil magistrate who wears the purple must resign or be rejected. If an applicant for believer seeks to become a soldier, he must be rejected, for he has despised God. Now, this is interesting here, because Hippolytus' tradition, apostolic tradition, is actually a form of church regulation. It's not just a moral teaching by a father. It's how a church, presumably the church in Rome, because Hippolytus was living in Rome, was run. Which compare that to the way Rome is run today, and it's very interesting. Tertullian again. Of course, it is faith comes later, after someone who was already enrolled in the military and finds someone already occupied with military service. Their case is different. For example, there is an instance of those whom John the Baptist received for baptism, and of the most faithful centurions. I mean, the centurion whom Christ approved, and the centurion whom Peter instructed, i.e. Cornelius. Yet at the same time, when a man has become a believer and faith has been sealed, there must be either an immediate abandonment of the military office, which has been the course of many, or else all sorts of quibbling will have to be resorted to in order to avoid offending God, and such quibbling is not allowed even outside of military service. All right, let's see the next one here. I'm going to probably get one more in here. The early church and separation. The world, okay, Second Clement, that would be Clement of Rome. The world and the next are two enemies. we cannot therefore be friends of both. You know that you who are the servants of God dwell in Hermas, sorry. You know that you who are servants of God dwell in a strange land, for your city is far away from this one. If then you know your city in which you are to dwell, why do you here provide lands and make expensive preparations and accumulate dwellings and useless buildings? He who makes such preparations for this city cannot return again to his own. Do you not understand that all these things belong to another and are under the power of another? Take note, therefore, as one living in a foreign land, make no further preparations for yourself than what is merely sufficient, and be ready to leave this city when the master of this city will come to cast you out for disobeying his law. Hermas again. And refrain from much business, and you will never sin, for those who are occupied with much business commit also many sins, for they are distracted about their affairs, and they are not serving the Lord at all. Which is interesting because that's basically an oblique reference to 2 Timothy 2:4, where Paul says you cannot be a good soldier of Christ and have a business. Justin the Martyr. And your pagan assemblies I have come to hate, for they are excessive banqueting, subtle flutes that provoke people to lustful movements, useless and luxurious anointings, crownings with garlands. Tatian. I do not wish to be a king. I am not anxious to be rich. I decline military command. I detest fornication. I am not impelled by insatiable love of gain to go to sea. I do not contend for chaplets. I am free from a mad thirst for fame. I despise death. I am superior to every kind of disease. Grief does not consume my soul. If I am a slave, I endure servitude. If I am free, I do not boast about my good birth. Die to the world, repudiating the madness that is in it. Live to God. Tatian again. If you are superior to the passions, you will scorn all worldly things. Irenaeus. Now he, Christ, has not merely related to us a story about a poor man and a rich one. Rather, he has taught us some things. In the first place, he has taught us that no one should lead a luxurious life. No one should live in worldly pleasures and perpetual feastings. No one should be the slave of his lusts and forget God. Clement of Alexandria. Wherefore we have no country on earth that we disdain earthly possessions. Bunch from Clement here. If you would lose, withdraw, and separate your soul from the delight and pleasures that is in this life, for that is what the cross means, you will possess it. It will be found resting in the looking for hope. God stood in the congregation of the gods. He judges in the midst of the gods. Who are these gods? They are those who are superior to pleasures, who rise above the passions. It is those who are greater than the world. Tertullian. Why, on the days of gladness, a pagan festival, why do we neither cover over door with posts with laurels, nor intrude upon the day with lamps? Is it a proper thing at the calling of public festivity to dress your house up like some new brothel? We do not celebrate along with you the holidays of the Caesars in a manner forbidden alike by modesty, decency, and purity. But as those in whom all ardor in the pursuit of glory and honor is dead, and we have no pressing inducement to take part in your public meetings, nor is there aught more entirely foreign to us than affairs of state. We acknowledge one all-embracing commonwealth, the world. We renounce all your spectacles as strongly as we renounce the matters originating them, which we know were conceived as superstition when they give up the very same things which are the basis of the representations. Among us nothing is ever said or seen or heard which has anything in common with the madness of the circus, the immodesty of the theater, the atrocities of the arena, and the useless exercises of the wrestling ground. Why do you take offense at us because we differ from you in regard to your pleasures? Let us compare the life of the world and of the prison, and see if the spirit does not gain more in the prison than the flesh loses. In prison, you have no occasion to look on strange gods. You do not bump into their images. You have no part in pagan holidays, even by mere bodily mingling in them. You are not annoyed by the foul fumes of idolatrous solemnities. You are not pained by the noise of the public shows, nor by the atrocity, madness, and immodesty of the celebrants. The prison does the same service for the Christian that the desert did for the prophet. Moreover, what causes have you for appearing in public in extensive grandeur? After all, you are removed from the occasions that call for such exhibitions. For you neither make the circuit of the temples nor demand to be present at public shows. Furthermore, you have no acquaintance with the festivals of the Gentiles. Now it is for the sake of all these public gatherings and of much seeing and being seen that all ceremonies are exhibited before the public eye. You, however, have no cause for appearing in public, except such as is serious. Either some brother who is sick is visited, or the sacrifice is offered, or else the word of God is dispensed. So long as you deem yourself a Christian, you are a different man from a pagan. Give back him his own view of things, since he does not himself learn from your views. Why lean upon a blind guide if you have eyes of your own? Why be clothed by one who is naked if you have put on Christ? But as for you, you are a foreigner in this world, a citizen of Jerusalem, the city above. Our citizenship, the apostle says, is in heaven. You have your own registrars, your own calendar. You have nothing to do with the joys of this world. In fact, you are called to the very opposite. For the world will rejoice, but you will mourn. The one peaceful and trustworthy tranquility, the one solid, firm, and constant security. Oh, we're at Cyprian now, sorry. The one peaceful, trustworthy tranquility, the one solid, firm, and constant security is this: for a man to withdraw from this whirlpool of distracting world and to lift his eyes from earth to heaven, anchored on the ground of the harbor of salvation, he who is actually greater than the world can crave nothing or desire nothing from the world. How stable, how free from all shocks is that safeguard, how heavenly to be loosed from the snares of this entangling world, and to be purged from the earthly dregs and be fitted for the light of eternal immortality. Whatever things are earthly and have been received in this world and will remain here with this world should be scorned, even as the world itself is scorned. For we have already renounced the ceremonies and its delights and we came to God through a blessed passage, i.e. baptism. John stimulates and exhorts us. He says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. We should ever and anon reflect that we have renounced the world and are in the meanwhile living here as guests and strangers. He who has attained to trust, having put off the former man, should reflect on only heavenly and spiritual things. He should give no heed to the world that he has already renounced. Of this same thing, it is written in Matthew, he who does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. The time is limited. It remains, therefore, that those who have wives be as though they do not have them. Of this very matter he wrote to the Galatians, but be it far from me to boast, except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world is crucified to me. Of the same thing in the epistle of Peter, at strangers, pilgrims, abstain from carnal lusts, which war against the soul. Of the same thing in the epistle of John, love not the world, nor the things that are in the world. All right. So what can we say? Well, first of all, I don't see any ambiguity. There is a single, consistent drumbeat, which is anybody who actually cracks open the New Testament and does a modicum of reading will figure out that Jesus is saying some very hard things, and some things that if you take straight up are going to lead to more or less what we've just heard tonight. And while this is not yet a complete reading of all the stuff that we have to look at for the sake of time, we'll end it here. At the end of this reading, there will also be some references to 4th century fathers and explaining how things changed. But it should be abundantly clear that there is no disagreement amongst the early fathers on this question, that Constantine radically altered the nature of Christianity and that many people went along with it to the overall detriment of the faith. So the question then is, why is this not better known? Why is this suppressed? Well, Paul says in Romans 1, the wicked suppress the truth and unrighteousness. So part of this is the wicked suppressing the truth. The other thing is most people just don't know. Church history is a very arcane subject, especially for Protestants. Really only Anglicans get involved in that. And then also we have, the Catholics and the Orthodox sitting on this, which, can only really be explained as a conspiracy, because how can all of this be here and it's not known? Well, if it isn't a conspiracy, they haven't read it either. So either they read it and they're suppressing the facts, or they haven't read it. But what is the key argument they make? Oh, well, we're the historic church. We're the New Testament church. We're the heirs to the church fathers. Well, does any of that sound like what we've seen with the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches over the years? No, not on the slightest. So the question is, it doesn't look good either way. Either they haven't read it and it's a bluff, and the historical argument is what I've always known it to be, a fraud based on complete total deception, or worse, they know about it and they intentionally bury it. Now, as I've already mentioned, there's 2 very good books that go into more methodical detail. As I mentioned, the one by Ron Sider, The Church and Killing, and then Caesar and the Lamb by Calansis. So they go into much more detail, but this is a basic overview of the material, and it's clear there's no disagreement, there's no ambiguity. By the way, there's also 2 spurious claims that these arguments were adduced because the Christians believed the world was going to end shortly. And then 2, well, first of all, Nothing we read indicated that they believed the world was going to end shortly. All Christians, even those today, believe the world will end when Christ makes it anew. So, other than the universally accepted Christian doctrine, there's nothing about an imminent return, like within their lifetimes. No, or the other spurious claim is which is half true, is that the early church fathers were not going to use we're not going to worship pagan gods, so they couldn't be in the Roman army or government. And if only they didn't have to worship the pagan gods, they would have freely done so. No, all the arguments we've heard are taken from a very literal, strict reading of the New Testament, specifically the teachings of Christ, with some appeals to the Apostle Paul. So again, all of this stuff is spurious. It is clear to anyone with eyes to see, ears to hear, who's bothered to read any of this stuff, that the early church has, at the risk of sounding anachronistic, and it's only not much, is basically the same position as the Radical Reformation in the 16th century of the Anabaptists. At least on these issues, it's the same. In fact, there's no difference at all. That was the original position. And it wasn't justified on the imminent end of the world, as secular scholars have argued. It wasn't justified by, they worship pagan gods, I guess we can't join the Roman army. Not solely. That is one of the reasons. But it's an in-principle argument. And then we have to ask ourselves, how did this incrustation of fraudulent scholarship develop? Well, from the point of view of the just war tradition, that's obvious. These people just completely refute the whole point of Christendom. And so there's a vested interest in suppressing it. Then the other thing is the people of the world, they're going to want to suppress it too, because how can you attack Christianity in this form? It takes such a high moral position that it leaves it unassailable. So in order to attack Christianity, secular scholarship is inclined to a similar reading as Catholics, Orthodox, and others, because, well, that's a Christianity full of flaws and atrocities and very easy to criticize. Not this. Again, why are the Christians world denying? Because they give at least three arguments. One is the passions, right? We've mastered the passions, and the passions lead to war. Well, that was the common consensus of all Greek philosophy, that passions led to violence. So far from being contrary to anything, it's consistent with it. And as I mentioned before, Plato in the Credo says basically just this much. He says, even a just man himself, Socrates, cannot resist the Athenians, the unjust man. This is also what we find in the first yama of Hinduism with the ahimsa. So again, far from being out of step with any sort of perennial tradition, this is a more clear expression of it. And I will do a video on ahimsa at some point where I look at the Vedic tradition, Christianity, and some of the Greek philosophers and thought, and tie this together in a sort of perennial framework. But that'll be for a later episode. And then, lastly, the idea that the Christians were, again, confused is laughable, absurd, and idiotic. Again, there is no difference in any tone or tenor of anything that I read. And this goes from, To Clement is like written in the 1st century, and then Lactantius is in the early 4th. So we have the entire gamut of that era up until Constantine, and then everything changes. And I will explain that as we get to the end of this reading list. So let's see what we got in the chat. Not much, everybody. I see we have Zero World, Neurocraft, Bing Bong, Euthanasia, and Mega Slingen. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And I think by next week I can finish this reading list up. And I can then say the ball's in everybody else's court. I've done the work. I've got the quotes together. I've read the quotes. Anybody, now granted, this is obviously way too much to hope for. But if we never hear again that this was not the universal, unambiguous teaching of Christianity up until the 4th century, it's just so obviously bogus. And only people with base motivations would perpetuate this. Many people are ignorant, and again, it's to paraphrase Murray Rothbard, it's no sin to be ignorant of the history of the church. It's an arcane, specific teaching. But to have a loud vocal opinion on it without having studied it at all is inexcusable. It's a joke. And I'm here to do my part to put an end to this. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.